in the late 15th century, long before European flags were planted into foreign soil. The Caribbean islands were home to peaceful indigenous societies. Among them were the Arawak people, skilled farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. They lived without kings, without prisons, and without money. Their communities were built on sharing rather than ownership, cooperation rather than competition. This was not a land waiting to be discovered. It was a land already lived in, understood, and sustained. In October of 1492, ships from Spain cut through the Atlantic horizon. Christopher Columbus arrived, believing he had reached islands near Asia. What followed would later be celebrated as discovery. But from the perspective of those already living there, it marked the beginning of devastation. The Arawaks welcomed the newcomers. They offered food, water, parrots, and cotton. They did not raise weapons. They did not resist. Columbus noted their generosity in his journals, but his observations quickly turned calculating. He described them as people who could be made to work, ruled easily, and converted by force if necessary. Gold became the obsession. When large quantities of gold failed to appear, the Spanish imposed a tribute system. Every native was ordered to deliver a specific amount of gold on a regular basis. Failure was met with punishment. Hands were cut off. Bodies were left as warnings. Villages were burned. Men were forced into mines where air was scarce and collapse was common. Women were taken for labor and sexual exploitation. Children were left abandoned. Suicide and infanticide spread not from weakness, but from despair. European diseases arrived silently, but killed relentlessly. Smallpox, influenza, and measles swept through the islands. Yet disease alone did not destroy the Arawaks. Slavery, starvation, overwork, and systematic murder completed the process. Within decades, a population that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands was nearly erased. History books would later reduce this catastrophe to footnotes. Columbus would be remembered as brave. Progress would be praised. The dead would be forgotten. Howard Zinn does not present Columbus as a single villain. Instead, he presents him as the beginning of a pattern. The pattern is familiar. Conquest justified as civilization. Violence defended as destiny. Suffering dismissed as necessary progress. European powers claimed moral authority through religion and superiority through technology. Indigenous resistance was labeled savagery. Submission was called peace. Theft was renamed settlement. Zinn challenges the idea that such actions were unavoidable products of their time. Even in the 15th century, voices existed that condemned cruelty. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish priest, documented the horrors inflicted upon native populations and pleaded for their humanity to be recognized. Choice existed. It was ignored. As centuries passed, the same logic followed westward. Native tribes were displaced. Africans were enslaved. Workers were exploited. Each step forward for empire required someone beneath it. Zinn argues that traditional history focuses on leaders, victories, and dates because those stories comfort nations. They create pride. They avoid responsibility. But history told from the ground from the victims, rather than the victors, reveals a different truths. History, Zinn reminds us, is not neutral. What is included and what is excluded shapes how societies understand justice, power, and possibility. To teach children that Columbus discovered America is not just an error of fact, it is a moral choice. The chapter ends with a warning. When suffering is hidden, it is repeated. When myths replace truth, injustice becomes tradition. A people's history does not ask us to hate the past. It asks us to see it clearly so that progress, if it is to mean anything at all, no longer demands blood as its price. This chapter sets the foundation for the entire book. American history, Zinn argues, did not begin with freedom. It began with conquest. And only by listening to the silenced voices can history serve truth instead of power.